Hey guys, it's JT and I'm bringing you another chess mistake video. I changed up the format a little bit this time. I hope you like it. Let me know. Anyway, I opened the game with pawn to e4. He responded pawn to e5. So we went through standard development with knight to f3, and then we entered the Philidor defense with pawn to d6. I've told you guys before I don't particularly care for the main line of the Philidor defense, because of the way it liberates this bishop and causes the knight to move too many times in the first moves of the game. So generally, rather than go into the actual main lines, I just tend to develop a knight to c3. He responded with pawn to f5. Note that I could exchange here, but I don't want to exchange a center pawn for a flank pawn, and I don't want to give him a chance to develop this light squared bishop without using up a turn. So I decided against taking, and I simply got some pawn structure going by moving to d3, and I liberated my dark squared bishop. He then brought his knight down to f6. I pushed up to g3, preparing to fianchetto the kingside bishop. He developed a knight. I fianchettoed my bishop. He pushed a pawn here, trying to gain some pawn structure and possibly prepare to fianchetto his dark squared bishop, and I castled. He pushed to b6, which generally is signaling his intent to fianchetto here on the queen side. But what you'll see in a minute was that it was intended as an exaggerated fianchetto, which I'll explain in more detail that move when we come to it. I pushed to b3 with the actual intent of fianchettoing on the queen side, and now he moved his bishop out to g6, which is actually a very good move here because he's placing his bishop opposite this rook. And if I were to ignore this and just continue with my plan to fianchetto, then he could simply capture. And if he were to capture here, note that he's threatening my knight, and I really can't do anything about it. I just have to move the knight. I can't recapture, because if I were to recapture, notice that this diagonal would open up, and he'd be able to take my rook. So I don't want to do that. So the only other way to neutralize this threat would be to trade off this knight for this pawn. And that's not something I want to do because obviously you don't want to trade off a knight for a pawn. So here, rather than go ahead and fianchetto, I had to deal with this threat. So I moved my rook over to e1. Now came the most fatal mistake in the game. There were a lot of mistakes made by both sides in this game, but this is the one that really set off what would eventually occur, and this is the one that really decided the game. He pushed his pawn up to g5. Notice he left it completely hanging. There was no defense on it whatsoever from my dark squared bishop, and I think he expected me to he either didn't notice it or just expected me to continue with the fianchetto and allow him to gain some space on the king side. Also notice that he's destroyed his king side pawn structure, which you'll see later in the game is going to be devastating. So I came up and I captured with my knight. I could have used my bishop here and pinned down the knight, but I didn't want to extend my bishop that far into enemy territory that early into the game, especially considering how much space he had on the king side. I just didn't feel like I wanted to extend a bishop that far. I was much more comfortable doing that with a knight. And also it opened up an attack right here, because the knight would have been able to come here and attack the bishop and the queen. So for that reason, I chose to use the knight rather than the bishop here. So now he came here, probably with the intent to stop this attack. And note that now that that's gone, I can do what I please with the pawns over here. And now that I've got a material advantage, I'm pretty willing to exchange this center pawn for his flank pawn, because I've got a pretty decent control over the game in the center with my pieces. So I decided to go ahead and exchange. And now I missed a good move. At this point, the best move would have been to bring my bishop to c6, checking the king. And if he were to, say, block with his knight, I could simply go ahead and capture his rook here. So that was the strongest move in the position, which I missed, because I would have gotten a knight and a rook for it, which I did miss that move. And what I did instead worked out alright for me, which was queen to f3. So now I'm attacking this bishop. And now he brings his knight here to defend his bishop. And once again, I missed the best move in the position. I was so intent on my attack on the king side here that I missed queen takes on a8. And after his queen recaptures, I come down, and I would have gained a rook out of that deal. But, again, that's not how the game went. Instead, I attacked the bishop with my pawn. So here, he simply captures the pawn, and I took this knight, which was now opened up to attack. So now I've given him the pawn back that I took from him early in the game, but I've gained a minor piece. So I'm pretty decently ahead here. And also note that I'm attacking his rook. So I've not only taken material from him, but he's losing any chance he had at having any real initiative in this game, because I'm taking away all his attacking possibilities. So now he moved his rook to g8, and upon later examination of the game, I thought maybe this was a good move here, because then his king would have to run out here, and I could freely take his rook if I was able to dispose of this knight. So that might have been a good way to keep pressure on him and to maybe go up even farther in material. But what I decided to do in this game was to go ahead with this attack that I thought of earlier, which was to bring my knight over here to e6 and attack the queen and the dark squared bishop. So his strongest response here was probably just to go ahead and exchange, which he did. So I recaptured, and now I'm attacking the rook again. Now note, the best move in this position would probably have been to bring his rook up to g6. I can't recapture because his knight would have captured, or his pawn. So, and note, he doesn't really leave me very many squares on his side of the board where I can safely place my queen and continue with this extremely aggressive attack that I've come up with. So this probably would have been the best move in the position. It would have maybe given him a chance to recover some tempo and to gain the game back, put the game back on his terms for a little while. But I guess the pressure got to him, and he made another mistake with rook to h8. So now I brought my bishop out here to g5, pinning this knight down to this queen. Note that the knight was in fact already pinned, but now I have the ability to attack it if I can get a little stronger of an attack involved. So now he just goes ahead and attacks this bishop because he seems to have missed the stronger move, and the stronger move for me. The bishop is somewhat inconsequential actually, because here I saw what I should have been doing the whole time, which was to bring my bishop over to c6, checking the king. Note that he can't capture because his knight is pinned to his king by my queen. So his only legal move at this point is to go ahead and block with his queen. Now note, if I were to capture with my queen here, he could simply come out here, and it's still forced mate, but it's like mate in 10 or something. It's some really long-winded mate. But if I do this instead, it's mate in 2. So after he moves here, I move there. He captures my bishop, but it's meaningless at this point because simply queen to d7 is checkmate. So, guys, in the opening, be sure you don't leave pawns hanging, because it can often lead to a disastrous attack, and it'll often lead to you losing a lot of tempo and a lot of time, and that can just give your opponent even more chances to force you to make mistakes and to dominate you in the endgame. So anyway, my name is JT. Hope you've liked the video, and thank you for watching.